To say that I am going to record this session, this talk. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, today I'm going to talk about the rock-cut monasteries and temples at Ajanta and Ellora, and also Nalanda, which is near the town of Rajgir. And I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so can you all see that map? Great. So so far I've been talking about, I arrived in Delhi and went kind of down here, went through Patna, was up into Nepal, in this kind of northeastern area. But the rock-cut monasteries at Ajanta and Ellora were not part of the main pilgrimage that I did. They were an extension that I opted to add on to the main pilgrimage with the same company. And Ajanta and Ellora are located here, near this town of Aurangabad. So I had to fly from Delhi down to Aurangabad, which was about a two-hour flight south. And as with the main pilgrimage, I had my own guide and driver for this extension. It wasn't Jackie and Abhishek, who I showed you, I think, in the first talk. It was another couple of guys who were also very good. And I'm going to start with Ajanta, because Ajanta is the oldest of these three places that I'm going to talk about. And it's called the Caves at Ajanta, but it's really, I don't like calling it the caves, because it's really these wonderful monasteries and temples that have been cut out of the rock. And that's what I'm going to show you. So this is the site. This is the site plan, as you can see, and there's a river that goes right the way through. And everywhere where there's a red dot here, all around here, these are all the caves, all of the rock-cut monasteries and temples. So there are about 30 of them in total. They're all Buddhist, and they date from the 2nd century BCE to about 480 CE. And of these 30 caves, 5 of them are shrines or temples, and all of the others are monasteries where monks used to live. And so the rock comes round above the river here, and all of the caves are connected to the valley floor closer to the river by stone steps that were cut into the rock as well, into staircases. And the structures themselves were all built by workers who were paid, and who were employed by wealthy people who sponsored the construction of each one of these shrines or temples or monasteries. And they often took decades to build, because they are chiseling into the hard rock in order to create them. And in many of the structures that I saw, there are also sculptures cut out of the rock, and some of the rock surfaces are covered with paintings. And I'm going to show you some of those in just a moment. And they're some of the finest surviving examples of ancient Indian art. So bear in mind that some of these are a couple of thousand years old. And these caves are really just an amazing achievement because, as I said, they're cut out of the bare rock, and this is what it looks like as you approach them. So this is the road up. The river is dry. You can see the river around here, and it's now dry. And this is the path to the caves, and here are the caves all round here. And you can't see, they kind of come round here. So they're actually cut out of basaltic rock, which is incredibly hard and unyielding. And just, I think they're just an amazing human achievement. Both of these sites, Ajanta and Ellora, are both UNESCO World Heritage sites, not surprisingly. So let me show you now one of the caves. So this is one of the caves. To call it a cave, you can see it's a bit of a misnomer. And I apologize for this, it's a little bit pixelated again. This is cave 19, they're all numbered. And this cave is about 25 feet high and about 22 feet wide and about 53 feet deep. So let's go inside this cave. And this is what it looks like inside. And you can see here that there are these pillars that support a roof. The roof is shaped like a cathedral roof might be from a medieval cathedral. And the reason for this is, well, it's partly to distribute the weight, of course, but also that it resembles the branches of a tree. And of course, the Buddha taught and meditated underneath trees a lot. So this was kind of reminiscent of the Buddha teaching and meditating under a tree. And all around here you can see the carvings, the statues, and big statue of the Buddha here in this central area, and just the incredible detail. And all of this was carved out of the rock by hand. Remember that, by hand. So this is one of the most impressive caves at Ajanta. And what really struck me about not only this one, but all of them at Ajanta and Ellora is that creating a rock cut structure such as this requires a very different way of thinking than if you're building an ordinary building. So if you build a house, a monastery, a temple, a shrine, anything, you start with space, and then you use a material like brick or wood or cement to create form around the space. That's how we construct buildings, right? There's space, and then we bring a form to that space with whatever building material we're using to create the form. But with a rock cut, anything that's cut into the rock, it's the opposite. Because you start with the material, you start with the form, and then you have to carve it out to make the space. So it's a completely different way of thinking. For instance, you have to trust that there is rock present beyond what you can see at the beginning, beyond what you can see at the surface, and that it's homogeneous enough, that it's the same enough to be used to create a structure. So cutting anything into the rock is a huge exercise in trust, because you can't see what's below the surface. If there's a fissure in the rock, if the rock suddenly changes density, if there's an aquifer or a stream running underneath, you wouldn't necessarily know until you dug down, and then you'd have to abandon the project. Any flaws or change in the nature of the rock are enough to stop a project in its tracks. And bear in mind, some of these, as I say, took decades to construct. So also you have to be able to visualize the finished structure, the finished building, and to make an accurate plan of it before you even start. So not only do you have to trust that there's rock underneath where you're digging that you can continue to dig in and make a structure out of, but you also have to have a very detailed plan for what you're going to do. You have to know where each column will be, where each sculpture will be, where each wall will be, where each step or bench will be, each doorway, where each doorway is going to be. Because unlike a normal building, you can't tear something down and then replace it. You know, there are no do-overs in rock-cut monasteries and temples. One slip of the chisel, or if your plan's not accurate, it could destroy decades of work. So you have to have you have to be able to visualize it in your head before you start, because once you've started, that's it. You can't do something differently. You know, if you don't put the right number of steps in the staircase, then the staircase isn't going to be usable. So that kind of thing, you have to think through. So these caves and the ones at Ellora are really a miracle, I think, of human achievement and planning. And another way that these caves are truly amazing is the paintings. And most of the paintings in the Ajanta caves depict what are called the Jataka tales. And if you were in this group, gosh, probably about a year ago, I did a series of talks on the Buddhist parameters, the perfections, and I illustrated each of them with one of the Jataka tales. And the Jataka tales are the stories of the Buddha's life before he became the Buddha, before he was in his previous lifetimes. So the caves at Ajanta have these wonderful paintings, all or mostly about the Buddha's previous lifetimes and the stories that they contain. And the lighting's not very good, and they're trying to protect the quality of the paintings a little bit. So these were taken by flashlight, and this is a ceiling, and you can see the colors. You can see that there are people here, animals, flowers, and really sophisticated designs. And these paintings are remarkable. Here's another one. This was kind of low down towards the ground, just a geometric design. And here's another one, kind of a bit of an angle that's pretty decayed now. What's remarkable about these paintings is not only that they've survived, but they use artistic techniques that had never been seen before, and that indeed weren't seen again until the European Renaissance, about 1,000 years later. And these cave paintings, I'm just going to go back, the first one's probably the best. These cave paintings follow the guidelines for painting laid out in something called the Chitta Sutra. This is not a Buddhist sutra. It's an ancient Indian guide to painting that includes everything from how to prepare the paints, to how to make the brushes, to how to actually do the paintings. And in the Chitta Sutra, it identifies 6 elements necessary, that it deemed necessary to go into a painting, what a painting was composed of. And the first of those elements is that the painting must describe a form. Sounds kind of obvious, but and bear in mind, this is before abstract painting came into fashion in the 20th century. So the painting must have a form. So whether it's a flower or an animal or a person, whatever it is, or geometric shape, the painting must have a form. Secondly, it must have color. And as I said, the Chitta Sutra describes how to make different colors of paints from the plants and herbs that were around at the time. Thirdly, the painting must have some resemblance to reality. It must represent reality in some way or another. Third, and this is a really interesting one, fourth, I'm sorry, the painting must contain a sense of proportion or perspective. And so objects further away would be smaller, objects closer in the field of vision would be bigger. And I don't know how many, if you've seen some of the paintings of ancient Greece, or they didn't have this idea of proportional perspective. Figures are all the same. So this idea of proportional perspective 2000 years ago is pretty amazing. And here's another one that's amazing. Paintings must display emotion, human emotion, somehow, assuming that and even the animals have emotions. And unfortunately, I really don't have a good photo that shows emotion in these paintings. Right here, this is probably the best, but they do show emotion. You can see people smiling. You can see people being mad, being angry. You can see people in motion. Motion is often, for example, an elephant in motion. You can tell an elephant is in motion because the tassels around its neck would be facing backwards, not pulled by gravity down. Or people would have their hair streaming out behind them to show that they're in motion. Really very sophisticated. And the last element is one of brushwork to embellish the painting. And that made me think of, and the brushwork here is very delicate, even though a lot of it's decayed now, made me think of the Impressionists, the French Impressionists, and their brushwork. So this is all to me quite extraordinary, that these paintings that were done a couple of thousand years ago had all of these amazing features in. And I don't know anything about art, but this is what my guide told me, and I found it kind of fascinating. So after I was at Ajanta, I went to Ellora, and the caves at Ellora seem a little plain after the ones in Ajanta. Even though Ajanta predates Ellora, there are fewer paintings in Ellora. But what Ellora lacks in art, it more than makes up for in terms of its grandeur. And here's a site plan, the site plan of the caves at Ellora. And once again, there's a river, and all of the red dots are caves, and there's some here. So this is a huge site. And these structures were built from about 600 CE to about 1000 CE. So they're later than Ajanta, but they are carved out of basaltic rock. And in total, there are about 100 caves on this site, although only 34 are open to the public. And another thing that's really interesting about these caves is that they're not just Buddhist caves. Ellora also contains Hindu caves and Jain caves, as well as the Buddhist ones. And this is what Ellora looks like coming up to it. And you can see these caves. There are a lot of 2- and 3-story caves at Ellora. You can see there's a person here and a person here, so you can get an idea of the scale of the caves here at Ellora. And one of the caves that I'm going to show you next actually contains the largest single monolithic rock excavation in the world. And it's called the Kailash temple. You may have seen pictures of it before. It's not Buddhist, it's Hindu, but I'm going to show it anyway. And this is what it looks like. And this is from the inside. And for scale, here's me. So this picture was taken by my guide. But you just see the scale of this temple. It's just huge. And here's the sky. It's open to the sky, of course, up here. And all of these are elephants carved into the rock. And then statues up here. And various scenes from from the Hindu epics like the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, all carved in here. Just huge. And this Kailash temple is actually carved in the shape of a chariot. And looking at it from above, this is an aerial shot from a drone. I did not take this. This is what it looks like from above, where I just showed you the one inside. So you walk in through this gatehouse here, and it's in the shape of a chariot. So these 2 pillars here are meant to represent the 2 horses pulling the chariot. And here's the yoke between the horses. Here's the chariot itself, and here's the charioteer. And you can get an idea, and here you can see the people here. This is a person. This is a scale of a person. So the amount of rock that had to be removed to create this temple is just mind-blowing. Just mind-blowing. So, and this temple is dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva. So now I want to move on to another slide of, wait a minute. Okay, so that's me, that's that. Here's another slide of the caves at Ellora. And again, you can see these carvings everywhere. And these all had to be planned before the excavation began, you know, because I say, if you make a mistake, that's it. So I think, have I got, okay, here's another cave. I'm not sure which number it is, at Ellora. And again, this is a multi-story one. You can see the ground floor here, the steps, and then you can go up steps inside, and here you can see how it's been just literally carved out of the rock. And I also want to show you this one. This is also Ellora. This this one I think is truly amazing. Again, you can get a scale. Here's a person down here. So this is a cantilevered roof, if you like. So this is 24 feet in depth from here to here, and it is unsupported. The only supports come from these pillars and from the rock behind it. And you can see that this rock is some distance from the surface. It's pretty thick. It's just amazing that all of this 24 feet and however high this is completely unsupported. I thought that was fascinating. So they knew their engineering, definitely. Um, and as I mentioned a minute ago, one of the things that was particularly fascinating is not only the grandeur of these caves of Ellora, but how the caves of one faith stand right next to the caves of another. It's thought that some of the Hindu caves are the oldest at Ellora, with the Buddhist and Jain ones coming later, and also more Hindu caves coming later. And this really suggests that these three faith traditions all got along and didn't compete with each other, weren't fighting each other. And I was told that it was very common for Hindus and Jains to work on the Buddhist caves and for Jains and Buddhists to work on the Hindu caves and so on. In other words, there was religious cooperation, toleration, and understanding between Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains. And if you contrast, they all got along. And if you contrast that with the history of the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, this is quite extraordinary. These three more recent faith traditions have, I think, propagated the idea that their faith is the only true faith. And those who followed their faith would go to heaven, and those that didn't would go to the other place. So it's quite interesting that these early Indian faith traditions all got along and cooperated. There was no fighting or disagreement, and they all supported each other in building these magnificent monuments. So the ecumenical movement, if you like, is nothing new. It was happening 2,000 years ago at Ellora, which I thought was, what if all religions could get along these days? Wouldn't that be amazing? So now I want to move to Nalanda. And this is the last place I'm going to talk about. And Nalanda is located near Rajgir, so this was part of my main pilgrimage. And it seems that the Buddha did actually teach at Nalanda, but before it was a university. It was only established as a university after, quite a while after his death. And it's also true that the Buddha's disciple Sariputra was born at Nalanda. And the university actually wasn't established until the 5th century CE, and it operated for about 700 years until 1197. And during those 700 years, it played a vital role in promoting Buddhism and the arts and various academic subjects during what was called the Golden Age of India in the 5th and 6th centuries CE. And I think it's worth noting that the first European university wasn't established until 1088, about 600 years after Nalanda, and it was the University of Bologna in Italy. And also Christ Church at Oxford was established in 1096, so a few years after Nalanda University. So those were the first European universities centuries after Nalanda. And what you're looking at here is a map of the parts of Nalanda that have been excavated. So Nalanda is a huge site. It's about 35 acres in size, and only a quarter of it has been excavated. And this site plan shows most of the portion that's been excavated. So what you have here, oops, where's my pointer gone? So here are all the monasteries, all side by side. and these are the individual cells, and each monastery has a courtyard. And then most of the temples and the stupas are all across here. So a very well planned, and this is just the bit of Nalanda that we know about today. And there were within the whole site, there were 10, I'm sorry, in this area there are 10 temples. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the excavated portion. Meditation halls and stupas and parks and classrooms and lakes elsewhere. It also had a 9-story library in which the monks meticulously copied books and documents so that individual scholars could develop their own collections, their own libraries. It also had these cells that I mentioned, where often there was, the cells were for 2 people, 1 student and 1 teacher often. Although on the whole site, it's thought that at the university's heyday, there were 10,000 students and 2,000 professors. It's huge, just huge, this site. And it taught the arts, it taught medicine, it taught mathematics, astronomy, politics, the art of war, and of course Buddhism. And the Buddhism that was taught here was what's called Mahayana Buddhism and also Vajrayana Buddhism, which Mahayana is now today represented in the Zen tradition and the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism. And Vajrayana is also represented in the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism. So the complex was built of bricks, and it was built by the students and the professors. They did it together, so no paid workers here. The students rolled up their sleeves and did it themselves. And let's look at some other slides of Nalanda. So this is what it looks like, the excavated portion looks like today. And you can see the brick, although this of course has been restored. And here's another example. And Nalanda was kind of, over the 700 years, it was kind of progressively built, so that you'll often, as parts of it subsided, they would build on top of it. And so you'll see these interesting staircases that go up to different levels. You can see one here, and there's another one here, and there's one here that obviously, there's nothing underneath now, but there was originally. So to me, one of the most remarkable things about Nalanda was that each of the monasteries that's been excavated, and let me just go back, each of these here had its own water supply in the central courtyard, and that each block of cells where the monks had its own was attached to a central drainage system, so that they could get their drinking water, washing water, whatever, and then it would be drained through these drainage channels, which is pretty impressive for 2,000 years ago. And Nalanda, oops, sorry, there we are. That's the last slide I have of Nalanda. Nalanda attracted students from all over the world at the time, from Korea, Japan, China, India, obviously, Tibet, Indonesia, Myanmar, Persia, and Turkey. So this university really helped to propagate Buddhism throughout Asia in particular. And it's said that the teachers, as well as sleeping in the same cells as the students, and building the structures alongside the students, the teachers also acted as gatekeepers, and that to gain admission to Nalanda, a prospective student showed up at the gatehouse from Japan or Indonesia or whatever, after traveling for a number of years probably to get there. And before they could be admitted, the teacher asked the prospective student a question. And if their answer was satisfactory, they could enter and become students. And if not, they were turned away. So that was the admissions test. And it was a question, that would somehow relate to Buddhism or the life of the Buddha. And Nalanda was attacked and rebuilt twice in its lifetime, but in 1197 it was ransacked by Turkish Muslim invaders, and it never recovered. And sadly, the library that I mentioned, that is said to have contained 9 million manuscripts when it was destroyed, was burnt to the ground by the Muslim invaders, and the fire lasted from 3 to 6 months, depending on the source that you read. So all of these wonderful 9 million manuscripts were destroyed. And Nalanda, the destruction of Nalanda happened at a time when Buddhism was already in pretty steep decline in India. As I said, the height of Buddhism in India was really around the 5th and 6th centuries, and it was really the de facto religion of India and spread to many parts of Asia and even some Western countries. But over time, Buddhism declined, and the causes of the decline are the source of much debate among scholars. And I don't think I'll go into the reasons, but if anyone's interested, I think Linda had a question about this a week or two ago, and maybe if there's time, Linda, I can come back and go through the reasons. But I'm looking at the time here, and I think I'll just go on, if that's okay. So anyway, one of the reasons for the decline was that there was a series of invasions, culminating in especially Islamic invasions, Muslim invasions, and Islam was quite intolerant of other religions, and so a lot of Buddhists were attacked and killed. That's one of the reasons. And Buddhism never recovered in India. So it went from being the kind of de facto religion of millions of Indians to, in 1951, there were only, according to the Indian census, there were only 181,000 Buddhists in India out of a population of over 360 million people. So Buddhism virtually disappeared in India. And even today, there are thought to be only between 10 and 20 million Buddhists out of a population of 1.46 billion. So it's a tiny percentage still of Indians who are Buddhist. But although Buddhism is very much a minority faith in India, I did sense that the Indian people are proud of their Buddhist history and they're curious about it. Most of the people that I saw at Buddhist sites were Hindus, and there seemed to be a real genuine respect and appreciation for the Buddha, in contrast to the divisions in India today between Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. That's the end of my slides. And I want to just talk briefly to end this series with a few reflections on the nature of pilgrimage and what this one meant to me personally. And first of all, what is a pilgrimage? What is the essence of pilgrimage? And I think For me, a pilgrimage is a journey to unknown places that have some spiritual significance, where I went deeper into my own experience, my own life as well, and really searched for a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, of human life, something larger than myself. So I think this is really the essence of pilgrimage, is that it includes both an external journey to a sacred place or places, but it also includes an internal journey. And I think of famous pilgrimages like the Camino de Santiago in Europe, or the Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca undertaken by Muslims, of course. I think about pilgrimages to Jerusalem by Jews, and of course the Buddhist pilgrimages, that pilgrimage that I did. So pilgrimage to me includes an external journey, but also an inner journey. And these two journeys, it seems to me, are completely dependent on each other and interrelated. So the outer journey to sacred sites, special places in the world, really inspires and contributed to my own inner spiritual experience. And conversely, my inner spiritual journey, if you like, while I was on the external one, shaped and influenced how I perceived the sites I went to. So, for example, my journey to the places where the Buddha taught and meditated inspired and contributed to my inner journey, and conversely, my inner journey shaped and influenced how I perceived where I was physically. They were inseparable, and this is the first insight that that was really important to me. So this may sound kind of obvious, but it was really an insight to me that went beyond the kind of intellectual and conceptual, and something that really was a journey of the heart, a journey of the spirit, if you like, intertwined with this external journey. Another understanding that came to me was, or what happened was, that I made, I think, a much closer personal connection with the Buddha, and gained an appreciation that his legacy is a living legacy. It's not a dead one. So this wasn't about visiting places where someone I admire had lived and taught 2,600 years ago. It wasn't about the past so much as it was about my experience of these places in the here and now, in the 21st century. It was as if the places that I went to became like a portal, a doorway, a window into the experiences that the Buddha taught about, but in the present day. So this was particularly true for me in Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha awakened, and where he, as an ordinary human being, showed what is possible for all of us, awakening and an end to suffering. So when I sat underneath the Bodhi tree, I somehow connected with the reality that all of us have the potential for awakening today. It's less about some extraordinary being who attained awakening 2,600 years ago, and it was more about the insight in the present day that I had while I was meditating there, just as he had meditating, that we all have this potential for awakening. In other words, I might say that the Buddha's humanity was more inspiring to me than any of the myths that are told about him. And over the time of the pilgrimage, I developed a much deeper and more heartfelt understanding of him and his teachings, because I had more knowledge of his life and times. And I have to say that despite all of the 21st century trappings, the motorbikes, the cars, the noise, the cell phones, the garbage, the smells, everything in modern day India, I still had a very powerful experience of connecting with the India of the Buddha 2,600 years ago. You know, life in the villages has a lot of resemblance to how it used to be, even though most people have satellite dishes on their roofs. But you can still meet a modern day Sujata. You may remember Sujata was the woman who gave the Buddha the rice milk after he had engaged in his extreme practices and was nearly dead. You can still find a Sujata serving some sweet, energizing drink by the side of the road. Farmers still plow their fields with water buffalo. They don't use tractors so much, although there are a lot of tractors on the roads. The rivers and the mountains and the caves that we hear about in the suttas are still there. You know, Vulture Peak that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, the Bamboo Grove, and so on, all still there. And this makes the Buddha's story very real, and it's as if you are seeing the context for his whole life today in the 21st century. I think I also experienced the pilgrimage as something of a meditation in itself. It wasn't about ticking off, you know, one Buddhist site after the other. If it's Monday, it must be Bodh Gaya, or if it's Tuesday, it must be Nalanda. It wasn't like that at all. For me, the pilgrimage was like any meditation, and it was about the journey. It was not about arriving. It was about really being in the present moment and accepting whatever was going on in the present moment, even when it was hot, noisy, smelly, crowded, and all of that air pollution I showed you. It was really about having an opportunity to cultivate awareness and be present to whatever my experience was. And that was a blessing, to see the pilgrimage as a meditation. And also about responding skillfully and with kindness and compassion to whatever arose. And as a result, I think now I feel much more connected with the human being that was called the Buddha, and more knowledgeable about him, and certainly more connected with the people of India today and how they live their lives. And I feel a renewed inspiration and determination and perseverance to continue to deepen my own meditation practice, my own practice of cultivating awareness, both on the cushion and in daily life. And perhaps above all, I have a renewed sense of love and compassion for all beings, and seeing just how much we have in common. You know, common humanity. The people in India were just like me, and I was just like them in so many ways. And just a sense of compassion and desire to do whatever I can to alleviate the suffering of others and to support awakening. And lastly, I feel just an immense amount of gratitude, not only for the Buddha, of course, but also for everyone and everything that allowed me to make this trip and then come home and tell you about it. So thank you for your kind attention. And that's the end of this series. So it is 6:30, so if anyone has to leave, please feel free to do so. But I'll also see if there are any questions, and I'm just going to stop the recording.